I feel really honored to get to introduce Jay Hupert to you. I'm going to read to you his official bio a little bit. Jay Exodus Hooper, they, them, teaches theater history, current PhD candidate within the School of Interdisciplinary Arts and Ethical Humanist Clergy. Both as performer and clergy within the ethical culture movement and First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, their ritual-based performance is grounded in the act of homiletics, decolonial humanism, and Black intellectual thought. Jay's love for orality involves the aesthetic of Black folk talk, one of imagination as meaning-making. Their word working emphasizes human freedom and interconnectedness through embodiment, intuition, creativity, and improvisation. Jay is an educator and an artist in every single fiber of their being. They are a seeker of truth, their own and the world's, in every sense. Jay is a love-seeking missile who can explode many of your previous ideas about what is possible in this world. Jay taught my children in the children's program that I will liken as the phoenix rising up from some ashes. And let me tell you, I am so thrilled that we are now going to hear some pearls. So Jay, take it away.
Wow. Okay. That was a really good remix. And I'm definitely here for this. So thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you so much. It is so good to be home. Even though I am not physically in the space, it is beautiful to be home and to know that I am back where I first began, right? As the old folk would say, my ancestors would say, baby, sometimes you got to return to your first love. And I remember coming to Riverdale ever so often, and of course, getting myself equipped even more after seminary, more prepared to do even more justice work and more radical loving. And so if you are not familiar with me, I'm glad that you had a chance to hear that introduction, because I think that latter part speaks to my character. The other part speaks of the things I do. And trust me, they come full circle in this moment. So I am so grateful to see all of your beautiful faces. Thank you for joining me this morning. Send a lot of love to all of you who have been a huge supporter, big fan of my work, and those who follow me also on Keep Living on my Facebook Live show on Tuesday. It is really an honor. It is really, really an honor. I want to sit back for a minute, and I want, the task was given to me to talk about beloved community. Beloved community has always been an interesting conversation as we continue to think. The first time when we really kind of extract the word beloved community, we immediately go back to Dr. King. We immediately go back to the goals of what beloved community actually means, right? And one of the things that we think about in this case, before I give you my actual title for this, beyond just the theme of beloved community, I want to read this in your hearing regarding Dr. King's message. He said, our goal is to create a beloved community. And this will require a qualitative change in our souls, and as well as a quantitative change in our life. If you didn't catch that the first time, it requires a qualitative change in our souls, as well as a quantitative change in our life. Automatically, you probably began to start counting on your fingers of how many diverse friends you have. You probably began to think of how many family members that you probably know are in certain kinds of relationships that are different from your own. You already begin to think about how many times you probably endorsed or also invested in a business that is different from the community that you're used to always going to, possibly if you live in the suburbs or various places in New York City, right? We have a tendency to get a quality that becomes very settled and complacent. And so today I titled this Beloved Community, When Glory Comes to the Table. That's probably a tough message. When we first hear the word glory, we immediately think, oh, could be very religious. And I could actually tell you, no, it's not. Because actually, I'm going to sit with some Adler today. Now, I'm going to go back to our founder for a few minutes but I want us to sit first with what is beloved community. When Dr. King talks about beloved community, Dr. King talks about beloved community as a global vision in which all people share in the wealth of the earth. He's actually talking about poverty, hunger, homelessness, right? And getting rid of that as well, right? He also is focusing on racism and all forms of discrimination and bigotry and prejudice that will be replaced by an all-inclusive spirit of siblinghood. All-inclusive spirit of siblinghood. Some special words that we're hearing this morning. Bear with me. One of the things that I would like to think about, because though this term in many ways began to rise up during the time of the 60s and during the civil rights, King was leading us into a conversation that King was experiencing, but not everybody knew about. It was a conversation that King was experiencing and not everybody knew about because King had certain people in the circle. He had already basically been circled around a beloved community that in many ways held the arch of his vision, in many ways challenged and made his theology uncomfortable, in many ways made the social political norm, in many ways disrupt what it was always used to. King was pushing on some things. He was pushing on some things because in his corner, he was already experiencing not only his own kind, if we will, whatever own kind can be, but let's just put it in the majority. The majority of this movement, the civil rights movement, as we knew, was also deeply influenced by a Christian man, particularly also a Christian Black man. A Christian Black man who was also heteronormative. A Christian Black man who was heteronormative, who was also educated. Let's pause there. Dr. King fits in many ways what would be considered to be a fine, respectable politic. Dr. King already fit the molds, though not by race, but by every other qualification in this classified understanding of our social political norms. He was palatable. But he didn't have people around him who were palatable. This is why beloved community has to be a change in the soul. It's soul. Let's shift that word and change it into ideology. Right? The very essence in which you hold as your deep meaning that you value, your core value. If somebody doesn't fit your standard, that area, right in there, what does that look like? You probably have pondered for a few minutes and probably sat. But let me tell you a little bit more about King. King, and as many kind of became aware this week, and some of our AEU community was exposed to from an article that came out in 2012 in the Washington Post. People had forgotten that King actually sat with Philip Randolph, who was Black and an atheist. I hear a problem with the civil rights movement. How dare I say that? But I do. Because the religious majority of Christianity ignores the dialogue of non-theistic, atheist, humanist, and Gnostic people, and particularly people of color. That story doesn't just sit with us in just any kind of ways, especially in this case. But even Randolph, who was an atheist, was in many ways the initiator of the conversation, was in many ways the brainchild to thinking about something so monumental regarding the March on Washington. If we look at Randolph, that's one example. Let's go ahead and sit further. Let's look at Bayard Rustin, not able to attend the march because of the simple fact that Adam Clayton Powell was not receptible to the idea of one of King's closest comrades, Bayard Rustin, because Bayard was Black and gay. King had no problem, but of course, the choice had to be made that Bayard Rustin would not attend the March on Washington, though he was heavily in the organizing framework of it, and because of the simple fact that Adam Clayton Powell, who was also a politician and a preacher, had made it very clear that he would out King about his association with a gay Black man. Something very beloved, I guess we need to push on regarding the civil rights movement. If we're not getting it just yet, let's sit with Fannie Lou Hamer. Fannie Lou Hamer wasn't deeply educated, but she had a heart of gold. Her problem, technically, is that she was a Black woman. And also, this was a march dealing with mostly men, and men taking the front line. Do you see for a moment how little by little, as this movement is developing, certain boxes are checked regarding diversity and inclusion, but only certain boxes can be checked. Certain boxes. How many times have we been in a space where we know that certain boxes of ourselves can be checked? If we had checked all the boxes, I actually asked the question, is glory at the table? Glory, in my terms, is the fullness of your humanity. In the words of Richard Schechner, who talks about performance theory, I like to think of glory in the aspect of aliveness, the fullness of your humanity. In many ways of what we talk about within our actual statement of purpose, that we are fully and capable. But what happens when somebody tells you that you're only allowed to check certain boxes to be in their presence? It is a very tough call. It is a very tough call. And actually, I don't believe, if I may sound oxymoronic for a minute, it is not a call at all. Because if you cannot welcome anyone in their full humanity, in their full radical self, and the very thing that allows for them to be them. In the words of Dr. King's mentor, the Dr. Reverend Howard Thurman, he said, I want to be me without making it uncomfortable for you to be you. And so I sat with a very tough message of beloved community, because not everybody's glory was in the civil rights. And maybe that's why we didn't get, maybe that's why we didn't arrive, if you will, to the place that we thought. because we did not embrace the full humanity, the full glory of the other. Maybe we were not prepared to sit with the eliciting of the other because we had a different espousal in our mind. If anyone knows me, they do know that, yes, I am all about the eliciting. But I'm so much about the eliciting sometimes has a tendency to break the frame. It has a tendency to push on structure. It has a tendency to push on our preconceived notions. It has a tendency to push on conformity. It has a tendency to do those things. And because of that, I think of the words of our dear Lord, who does say very clearly, it is better to speak knowing that we were never meant to survive. The truth of the matter is that when we look at King's message and we see the idea of beloved community as a framework for the qualitative change in our soul and the quantitative change in our lives, it is not a moment for you to go counting to figure out how many trans friends you have, if I may be real, how many people of color are at your workplace. It is not a time for you to stick and say how many women have you been friends with. It is not a time for any of those things. That you're just endorsing another social tokenizing. So what do we do? What do we do? I find that in many cases, in many institutions that I come across, particularly at Ohio University, and yes, even in our beloved community, sometimes our AEU, that we have an eye problem. We have an eye problem. And if you were ducking, it is not because I'm trying to come after you, and it's not because I'm trying to actually in many ways, but I want us to be able to hopefully see a little better. Because this kind of beloved community that is coming and that is working around us is looking to, in many ways, come towards us. It is a calling in, not necessarily a calling out. It is a calling in for us to be brave with our beloved community. Because this kind of changing of quality in our souls requires that we begin to think about what are our preconceived notions and our conformed structures that we are holding like gatekeepers that prevents beloved community. How are we preventing beloved community? You know, let's get at a really important man. Good old Felix. Let's spend a little time with him. Because I like to teach every once in a while. You know, Adler introduces us to something that many folk don't like to talk about. And we don't like to talk about Adler a lot anyway, but here it is. Adler introduces us to what is called the ethical manifold. You have probably heard this term mentioned, and you have probably heard, especially from our fearless leader, Joan Johnson Lewis. She spends a very heavy amount of time unpacking such wisdom. And I think in many ways, Riverdale, in many ways, has always been on the cusp of riding what is called an ethical manifold. It is deeply trying to always massage out ideas of this interrelatedness. To really sum up what an ethical manifold is would probably be actually a 2-day discussion. Because if you're talking Adler, you're talking Victoria. But I'm going to do my best to do it in a little less time. The few things that we need to know about the manifold is that the manifold requires it to be a full totality of existence. In order for it to, everything has to be in full totality. So everything that you are has to come in full totality. It has to be there. That's one. How about this? Sit with this for a moment. The second point and the reason for the manifold is for it to be connected without flaw. That is like the humanist, like, that's a, I don't know. How does it sit with you? Without flaw? I mean, we have the right to be human, not perfect. Let's sit with that for a little bit more. Or maybe we can be beautifully flawed. And I like that idea just enough as well. Right? What we're sitting with is that there has to be, in many ways, a shift within our interrelatedness with each other. King understood the interrelatedness and unfortunately could not derive out of, because of the hands that were involved in the civil rights, could not in many ways elicit, which is the first rule of thumb for the manifold, for these individuals like Randolph, like Bayard, like Fannie Lou Haman, to be fully seen. This is why they are, for years, have been in the backdrop, and now we are finally hearing about it. The manifold gets rid of this idea of a veil, social political veil. It in many ways allows for us to reach beyond our own veil. It is deeply interpersonal as well as it is social, communal, political. But we've got to reach beyond the veil. The manifold also requires that we, in many ways, help others achieve their uniqueness. How do we do that? Well, we might begin to start affirming people within their pronouns. We might begin to also acknowledge them in the way that they would like to be acknowledged. We stop practicing cultural compromise and move into cultural humility. We start thinking less about cultural implications, such as, oh, I know that culture. We don't assume, right? Cultural competency for years has been a method in which many people seek to understand diversity and inclusion. And what I actually push on, and for many of my work while I'm at Ohio, is that I push on what is called cultural humility. Let us ask questions so that we can elicit the truth of the being before us, right? Because if you don't know the kind of person I am, and I don't know the kind of person you are, right? A pattern that others may prevail in the world, right? So we in many ways already have developed a pattern. And what is this pattern? This pattern, when I grew up, and I was sharing this in my group discussion with Diane, I grew up with this pattern because I was African American, and many people who are on the margins or experienced the trench work early in their life, such as myself, would experience what was called respectability politics. And respectability politics, in short, is basically a belief holding to conformity of a mainstream standard. Conformity of a mainstream, girls don't act like this, boys act like this. We all have gone through it. It's a respectability politic. In some cases, I was told, more so an antithesis instead of a thesis. My antithesis was, you know what? Don't you stay out there in that Cadillac, driving that Cadillac in that neighborhood. Most of the time when I grew up as a child, I was always told what I shouldn't do so that I could survive. Versus what I could do so that I could enjoy the fulfillment of life's opportunities. My life was always circled around threat. Recently, just a few days ago, for example, I went to the restroom. I needed to really go. Of course, like most people who have to go to anything to handle their business. Yeah, I went. But it came with a lot of precaution because I understand that I am a gender conforming person, and I understand that my appearance and my presence oftentimes can, in many ways, disrupt. And being that I was out for the day, we had to stop and I had to go to the restroom. This is not a simple trip. It is not a simple trip because I understand that I no longer fit the respectability politics of what we understand as gender conforming. I also understood that I was a Black person, particularly in a more so working class white environment. And because of that, I even felt more threatened, particularly after the recent wave in the riots regarding the Capitol. And I do live near DC. I walked to the bathroom. Well, before I even got out the car, I began to tell my partner I needed to go to the restroom. He immediately responded and said, yes. Okay, that's fine. I said, if I do not come back in 10 to 15 minutes, come looking for me. Because I understood what awaited me after I even stepped out of my car. I go ahead, get out of the car with my tights and my little gold heels and proceed with my little sweater and leather jacket, proceed through a cold weather. And I click on through the mall. And already I am met with eyes, gazes, oppositional gazes in the words of Bell Hooks. I was being deeply stared at. Some in curiosity, some in disdain, some in complete confusion. But I continued. And arriving to the store that I needed to go to in order to find the restroom, I asked the sales associate, would you mind showing me where your restroom is? She immediately paused and looked me up and down. And then she smiled at me, her eyes, because she had on a wonderful mask. And she proceeded to take me upstairs and she pointed, the restrooms are over there, but if you would like, here is a restroom that is available and it's a single stall. I proceeded to the single stall because oftentimes, depending if my mask is very thick, most people do not know how I identify. I cannot just go to any kind of bathroom. I have to be very mindful of when I'm in the bathroom or if there is someone else in there. I'm also more particular when it comes down to children being in the bathroom with their parents and being very aware. And all of the time, I am deeply scratching for my freedom. I am deeply hoping that somebody sees my belovedness and that somebody would see me and appreciate the humanity that I am offering. It is hard to wake up every morning knowing that society or institutions or places that people attend that you love so dearly are not always willing to get behind you because they only know how to lean into their discomfort and not stand behind your discomfort. This is where I appreciate Adler's work most of all, because if anything is going to be deeply infinite, it has to surround you. And so I encourage Riverdale to begin to practice surrounding themselves, not only with quantity, but quality, with radical quality. that holds and honors not only your soul, but someone else. The complexity, their truth, their epistemologies. We need to be able to hold not only the word tension, not only do we need to lean into discomfort, we need to stand behind those who are in the discomfort. Sadly, I couldn't go into the single stall, and so I ended up attending and going into the male's room as I conclude this story. And I had to wait, because once again, I was waiting because someone else had come in to the restroom. And I did not want to step out of the stall not because of fear necessarily, but because I did not want them to be scared of me. I am never worried about scaring or being scared as much as I am worried about people being scared of me. That is a tough word. This is a tough message, because belovedness is very hard to find. Because belovedness doesn't start necessarily with just finding community that's intentional about your pronouns or accepting you because of the color of your skin or deeply because of the educational platforms you have. Belovedness starts with becoming. When you can leave and come back and know that you're always loved as you evolve. The first part of the manifold is eliciting. I am always grateful for people who never expect for me to always be the person they met. I appreciate the moments in which I evolve and a wellness that allows for me to fully be myself. I appreciate the fact that I am not asked to conform. It is in the manifold. It is in the manifold, or AKA the beloved community. But we've got to be willing to change the quality of our souls and change the quantity of our lives. We are not monolithic people. We all have stories. We all have experiences. We all come in different ways. You may be radically shook and placed into moments where you feel that someone should practice respectability politics, possibly practice, in some of our cases, our ethical politics. But we're not all monolithic. And there is no ethic for survival. There is no ethic for survival. And so I refer back to the words of Audre Lorde, reminding us that it is better to speak. Just like it was probably better for me to step out of the bathroom and not worry about what other people are thinking. Or quickly trying to rush back to the car to avoid all those opposition stares. Because the truth of the matter is that we are, in many ways, perfectly flawed. But with beloved community, we turn all of those flaws to perfection. We help each other's shape each other's content. We help each other achieve each other's uniqueness. We, in many ways, allow for others to be their distinct and unique self. in the words of James Baldwin, also allowing for them to disturb our peace. Allowing for those who are seeking our beloved space to disturb our peace. May we be faced with the challenge of allowing for others to disturb our peace and not conform to the ways in which we think are best for living, because there is no effort for survival.